followers were walking toward the village of Emmaus. And they were deep in conversation, going over everything that had happened in the last few days. And it was the kind of conversation that you have when your world has collapsed. And you don't know what's going to come next. And while they were walking along, a stranger came up alongside and asked, "What are you discussing so intently?" And they stopped in their tracks and they stared at him and said, "Are you the only person in Jerusalem who's not heard what happened in these last few days?" He said, "What happened?" And so they told him about Jesus of Nazareth. That he was a prophet and blessed by God and blessed by the people. And they said, we had hoped he would be the one who would deliver Israel. But our high priests and leaders handed him over to be sentenced, and on Friday, Rome crucified him. He was buried in a tomb. But early this morning, some of the women in our group went to the tomb, and they couldn't find his body. And they came back saying angels told them he was alive. So some of our friends ran to see for themselves, and they found the tomb empty, just like the women had said. The traveler was listening, and he said, "Well, then, why are you so sad? I mean, why is it so difficult to believe the women?" And then he began opening the scriptures for them from the books of Moses all the way through the prophets. And he showed them everything that pointed to him and said, "Do you not see that the Messiah had to suffer and then enter glory?" And as they reached the edge of the village, the traveler continued down the road, or started to, and they urged, "It's almost evening, stay, have supper with us." And so he did. And here's what happened at the table. He took bread and he blessed it. He broke it and he gave it to them, and in an instant their eyes were opened and they recognized him. It was Jesus. And then he vanished from their sight. They jumped back up. They ran to Jerusalem and breathless. They said to each other with excitement, "Were not our hearts on fire while he talked with us on the road?" See, these disciples had left Jerusalem full of grief and fear, because they weren't just mourning Jesus, they were worried what might happen to them next. That's exactly where Jesus meets us on the road. It's not when we feel strong and confident. It's when we don't know what's going to come next. And when we don't know how we're going to carry on. And it's then that God comes walking alongside us on a road that we're already walking on. Until suddenly we see God present in that grief and fear, and sometimes revealed in supernatural ways, and sometimes in ways that are quite ordinary. There was a little boy who packed a lunch and walked to the park by himself. He walked at least 4 blocks beyond where he'd ever gone alone before. And it was the day after his grandmother died. And for this extra long trip, he packed a larger than usual lunch. He took 4 packs of Twinkies and 2 cans of root beer. And he took a seat on the bench where an older woman was already sitting. And together they watched the pigeons. And after a while, he was hungry, and he took out a pack of Twinkies. As he was eating, he glanced over at the woman, and he offered her one. And she accepted it gratefully and gave him a big smile. And he thought it was the most beautiful smile he'd ever seen in the world and wanted to see it again, so he offered her a can of root beer. And she gave him the most beautiful smile he had ever seen. And for a long time, the two of them simply sat together on the park bench, eating Twinkies, sipping root beer, watching the pigeons. Neither said a word. Finally, the boy realized it was getting late and he should be on his way home. And he took a few steps, and then he turned back and he gave the woman a big hug, and her smile was bigger and brighter than ever. Now, his mother had started to worry, so she was relieved to see him walk back in the house, but she also noticed his mood had changed. "What'd you do today?" she asked. Oh, I had lunch in the park with God. And you know what? She has the most beautiful smile in the world. And meanwhile, the woman arrived back home, or rather at her son's home. See, her husband had died recently, and she had moved in with him. It was the first time in a long time that her son had seen her smile. And he asked, "What'd you do today, Mom?" "Oh, I ate Twinkies and drank root beer in the park with God." And you know what? God's a lot younger than I ever imagined. And like those two new friends on a park bench, the two disciples on a road from Jerusalem were grieving, worried about what would come next. But again, that is where God meets people, where God meets us, right? Right when our last hope is dashed, the last hope, and we doubt that anything will ever be okay again, it's then that God walks alongside the road that we're already walking on. Now, Edward Hayes tells the same story in a very imaginative way in his book, Prayers for a Planetary Pilgrim. The disciples fled Jerusalem and at sunset stopped at a small inn on the edge of Emmaus for something to eat. And they slipped quietly into a dark corner and kept their heads down. And they spoke in low voices to each other about the death of their teacher and how they had hoped he would liberate their people. And a Greek servant woman came to their table, poured wine in their cups, and she said, "Why are you so sad? You look like you've lost a dear friend." And Peter answered sharply, "We have, but that's no concern of yours. Do your work." "Sir, I too know the pain of a broken heart. I know what it's like to lose someone you love. But death is not the end of love." And then she took the wine cup, and to their surprise, she blessed it. And to their astonishment, she said, "Take and drink." And John jumped up, "Rabbi!" And at once the woman disappeared, and they ran back to Jerusalem to tell the others, realizing their story was not yet over, but still being written in that very moment. Their uncertainty about what comes next is where our story meets theirs, in hopes dashed, in losses. And I get these articles that come through my email or on my Facebook feed. It seems like more and more of them every day, stories that magnify our fears that Christianity is crumbling in America. For lots of reasons, and actually seemingly no reason at all. But what we do know is we are indeed living in a time when the landscape of the church is shifting under our feet. And the old structures are falling away, and the assumptions we once relied upon no longer hold. And it is in the midst of that God asks us not to manifest those fears, but to trust that the Spirit is still being poured out. God asks us to have some courage to dream. Just like the prophet Joel said, "After that I will pour my Spirit upon everyone. And your sons and your daughters will prophesy, and your old will dream dreams, and your young will see visions. And even on the male and female servants, I will pour out my Spirit in those days." And it is to those dreams and visions that stewardship is how we say yes with our whole lives. Because God invites us to dream with imagination the future God offers, which is not the repair of what used to be. It's not a return to an earlier version of what we once knew. Stewardship's not for the sake of nostalgia for a church that once was. It is courage for a church that is becoming. We are grateful for our ancestors in faith, and we carry their legacy forward, but we honor their past not by enshrining it. Our call is to dream God's future for the church, who invites us to share astonishment at what is being revealed and what is still to come. When you make a pledge to the church, it is a spiritual act. Because instead of despair, you are choosing hope. Because instead of fear, you are choosing generosity. Because when so many choose cynicism, you are choosing courage. And because in a world that is wounded, you are planting seeds of healing. And that is a dream worth pursuing. Because you're helping to build a world that looks more like the heart of God. And yes, stewardship pays the bills, right? Let's be honest. It supports our excellent staff. It cares for our beautiful sanctuary. It makes possible for people to worship online from wherever they are and to enjoy inspiring music and to be inspired in worship wherever we live. It builds meaningful ministries for children and youth and families and seniors and all generations together. And part of the budget, paying those bills, is to literally feed people. But stewardship is more than that, right? Your giving makes ministry come alive by surrounding people with love at their hardest moment. Your giving makes ministry come alive by showing everyone who has been hurt by religion that there is a vibrant spiritual home for them. And your giving makes ministry come to life by keeping alive the faith in the next generation so that our young people inherit a church that is brave and bold and beautiful and courageous and always looking forward, for them to keep writing our story. That Emmaus Road is not behind us. It is the path we walk now, dreaming God's dream together, a story still unwritten.